Hello, I'm Soyeon Park, Assistant Professor of the Department of Plant Science and Landscape Architecture at University of Connecticut. Today I'm going to speak about green infrastructure and urban community gardens. So if you have heard about these concepts, you may view these are two different ones, or you may think one is larger than the other in terms of scale and scope. In fact, there are no correct answers as these are still evolving concepts. And depending on how we conceptualize them in our planning and design processes, these spaces manifest themselves in different forms, function, and meaning. So let's look into this and see what their roles are in our urban environment. First off, community gardens are differentiated from other types of gardens. Obviously, it doesn't look like classic designed gardens or botanical gardens that you see in contemporary cities. What's most differentiated from other types of gardens are two elements. One, urban agriculture, and two, community engagement. So when it comes to urban agriculture, people imagine growing food, fruits, vegetables, and other crops in city environments. It can be urban orchard, urban farms, easement gardens, and even everyday landscapes. But community gardens have boundaries defined on shared plot of land for food production for individual or collective use. In urban context, urban agriculture ties in with food security issues. About 23.5 million Americans live in food desert, meaning that they don't have access to fresh, affordable, and healthy food. And community gardens have been adopted in these areas as a way of healthy eating and easy access to food. And research shows that urban agriculture has expanded by more than 30% over the past 30 years in the US. Here's a project that I was involved several years ago. It's not built yet, but the idea was to create a small community garden in a very poor African American community in a small city in Texas. It's a food desert area. Most of them don't have a car and no grocery stores within 1 mile radius from where they live. And so we worked with Early Head Start program, a federally funded family service program for low-income families with young children. We proposed a community garden in their yard so that residents can come and grow and get their share, and while school kids use it as an outdoor classroom. Community gardens also serve as a place to be engaged with other members of a community through gardening and other types of activities. They are often created for, by, and with the community groups. The ownership and governance of the garden properties can vary, though. It can be private, semi-private, or completely public. Each can determine a different level of engagement. Now, despite there is a cultural or visual stereotype of community gardens, it's important to understand that they provide multiple benefits and ecosystem services beyond singular function of food production. For example, vegetation heterogeneity, which is a common characteristic of urban community gardens, increases urban biodiversity, bringing bees, butterflies, and other pollinators, especially with native vegetation. It also attracts invertebrate and insectivore birds if they have a high canopy and seed-producing plants. It can also be a place to socialize, recreate, educate, and collaborate. It empowers the youth, increases environmental literacy and stewardship, and bridges the racial divide by bringing people from different ages, races, and income levels together. It's definitely good for physical and mental health and well-being. Research shows touching the soil and specific soil bacteria, Mycobacterium vaccae, triggers the release of serotonin, a happy chemical in our brain, which strengthens our immune systems. Community gardens also serve as a vehicle for reviving cities by engaging people in the process of reclaiming abandoned lot. It brings in energy and vibrancy back to the community, as in the example of Detroit, a typical post-industrial decaying cities in the US. In Chicago, they transformed a lot of vacant and underutilized pockets of urban lands into community gardens, expanding regenerative green spaces in the city. The Green Thumb program of New York City has become the largest community gardening program in the US. They have more than 600 gardens that support 20,000 urban residents. Many of them are located in ethically and culturally diverse neighborhoods where a wide range of community members cultivate and manage the gardens. Now let's shift a gear into green infrastructure. In the United States, green infrastructure has mainly been used in stormwater management, although the term was coined in 1994 to denote more comprehensive natural systems as our infrastructure. Common types of green infrastructure include rain gardens, bioswales, bioretention ponds, roof gardens, and permeable paving, among others. These are sort of decentralized measures to treat urban runoff from impervious urban surfaces. Instead of engineering-based solutions such as pipes or culvert, green infrastructure utilize natural materials such as soil and vegetation to store, filtrate, and infiltrate urban rainwaters. So the green infrastructure designs and applications in the US tend to appear differently depending on the climate zones and ecoregions. For example, the arid or semi-arid areas such as Arizona and Western Texas, dry rock gardens and rainwater harvesting features are prevalent. Whereas in wet regions such as Oregon or Seattle, you can see many bioswales and low-impact development cases. The US EPA, Environmental Protection Agency, has a what's called Campus Rainworks Challenge program. This is a design competition program intended to involve college students to design green infrastructure on their university grounds. Here are some examples from my former student. This one here is on the Texas Tech University campus. They put the native prairies between the buildings to represent Playa Lakes, Ogallala Aquifer, and Llano Estacado, very unique features in the western Texas. And these were used to mimic the natural hydrologic system on this demonstration site. This one here is on the Yukon grounds. Here we propose 11 floating islands, rain gardens, and native meadows in the Mirror Lake area to help sediment reduction, water quality, and vegetative buffer enhancement. Green infrastructure is not just for stormwater management, however. It has multifunctionality, including environmental, social, and ecological benefits. And so some people prefer using the notion of green stormwater infrastructure to indicate the narrow sense of green infrastructure. European countries, on the other hand, perceive it as a connected system of natural and semi-natural areas that collectively support ecosystem services. So it can be as small as a single plot of land and as large as a pan-European ecological network. Based on this approach, any type of natural or designed green spaces can be a green infrastructure, and as such, community gardens can be an integral part of the green infrastructure system. So here's a prime example of community garden as a productive green infrastructure in an urban setting. It's the Sunset Park Farm installed last year in Brooklyn, New York. It's on top of a large 8-story building. You can see the Statue of Liberty over the East Riverside right from this place. When I visited here in early September this year, there were not many people because of COVID-19, but it is still open to public every Sundays. It's about 3.2 acres, probably the largest rooftop soil-based farms in the country. They grow and distribute fresh local vegetables, herbs, and microgreens. It's operated by a social entrepreneur called Brooklyn Grange. They have 2 other locations, one in Brooklyn and the other in Long Island City. Together, they grow over 80,000 pounds of organically cultivated produce per year. What's interesting about this place is that they adopt green roof technology so that they reduce combined sewage overflow. And their 3 green roofs are estimated to manage 5 million gallons of stormwater per year. It's a critical habitat with deep soil and various vegetation and native pollinators, birds, insects, and bats, as compared to extensive green roofs usually planted with sedum and other ground cover. It's a social space with events, workshops, and yoga classes and other family programs. So rooftop community gardens may be a model for such a high-density cities as New York City, where there's increasing competition for space on the ground. And capitalizing upon the unused black tar rooftops for community gardens would be good for energy saving and reducing urban heat island effect as well. Now, let me end my talk with 3 aspects that I think is important. One is resilience. Obviously, we are now living in a world with overwhelming system disturbances, such as biodiversity loss, climate change, natural disasters, and pandemic. Community gardens can contribute to these challenges to some extent. Speaking of pandemic, the importance of being in nature is more important than ever. Numerous rapid research indicates that the use of parks and nature trails has spiked 200% or more in some cases. Many people started gardening during these times and find the joy of growing something in their own yards. This is great and helps stay us resilient. But then many of the community gardens were closed unless it's large enough to maintain social distancing. So it may be the time for us to think about what community gardens should look like and how you make them viable in response to future pandemics. Another piece of the puzzle is collaborative civic engagement. Community gardens can happen by only one ambitious, motivated individual or a single government initiative. There are precedents for that. However, to be able to sustain them in the long term, multiple players need to work together, not only expert and government, but also civically engaged residents. Lastly, we need a sort of revolutionary thinking and actions to make environmental and social changes. We need to educate one another and share resources, how our landscapes can be a source of these changes, as Larry Winner argues in his book, Garden Revolution. Fortunately, garden movement has become a cultural trend in many cities and countries these days, but we need to bring it into the mainstream of planning and design conversations and make them more accessible and equitable to all social classes. For green infrastructure, we need to showcase best practices and get the public and political buy-ins as to its transformative power. We need more evidences that community gardens and urban agriculture can be a thriving industry in cities. More importantly, we need to increase our capacity and empathy to serve our communities by caring about our land, plant, environment, people, and their lifestyles. All of these will create a virtuous cycle, making positive impact on our cities. Thank you.